So Kris, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks, Kristen. Well, it's been a really interesting couple of days for me. We've spoken a lot over the course of these days about methods and technology and which leads which. We've talked a lot about how to find new ways to find really deep understanding of our consumers as humans, as consumers. What I'm going to talk about is something that's a little bit different. At the beginning, Kristen talked about does methodology lead technology, and others may say technology may lead methodology, and there's probably a symbiotic relationship there. But at the same time, I think there's another part that's missing, and I want to talk about that a little bit, and that's really more about how we as an industry behave. If all these things are available to us, why can't we make it happen faster and more effectively? So where is the future right now? We've talked about the big data disruption for several years. We've talked about neuroscience. We've talked about social listening, and we've heard presentations even earlier today about that, about gamification, about mobile. But if you think about how long we've been talking about these things and how much they're really embedded into the day-to-day work that we as an industry are doing as agencies and clients, I think we'd all agree that the pace hasn't been what we expected it to be. So the question is, how can we stop talking about the future and make it the reality? And I would argue that the single biggest barrier for us is we have not paid as much attention to innovating how we behave as an organization, as an industry, as agencies and clients and as partners in that, as we have in innovating our methods and our technology. So I don't think we're going to achieve the future as quickly and as effectively as we want to unless we think about how we relate to each other on a day-to-day basis, how we set budgets and priorities within our organizations, and how we commission our work. And I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. So how we work together. Everyone says they want to work well together. We had a great panel yesterday of clients talking about partnership. We've heard earlier today from Carlos and Horst about partnership. But I think the question is, do we mean the same thing? Do the words we use often mean the same thing if you're talking about agencies and clients? And like in any relationship, communication really matters. And having sat on both sides of this fence, I've got a couple of examples of what I would call kind of some cognitive dissonance between what we say and what we mean between agencies and clients. I just want to see if this resonates with everyone. So a client will often say, I need a good partner. I don't know any client who says, I don't want a good partner. What they will sometimes mean by this is that we need someone we can trust. We are in a time-starved and resource-starved environment. I need agencies who can do the thinking for me, and I don't have to speak to them a lot. I can trust them to do what they need to do. On the agency side, when you hear the word partnership, sometimes what you think is, I'm going to have more time with my client. I'm going to have a seat at their table. I'm going to become an extension of their team. I'm going to get more and more understanding of their business context. As a result of this, you often have a tension about how much you talk, what you talk about between clients and agencies. And a client will often say, I thought I was hiring a partner, but I got to handhold them. I've got to talk to them all the time. They're asking for all this additional business context. I just want someone to get this work done. Sometimes a challenge there. Now, agencies aren't off the hook here either. Agencies will say, can we know the general budget you have for this? And what agencies often mean by that is, we need to understand some level of your parameters so that we don't over-engineer or under-engineer this work for you. We want to make sure that we deliver what you need at the price and the budget you have to pay for it. Having sat on the client side, I can tell you whenever I was on the client side and I heard, what's your budget, I immediately thought, they're going to bill me exactly what my budget is. Or they'll come in a little bit above it, and then we'll try to haggle back down to it. So there's a constant tension there. And the result of that is agencies often run a risk of over-engineering because they're trying to put everything into it to show how innovative they are and how breakthrough their thinking is. Or they'll under-engineer. They'll know they're in a competitive environment, and they might put junior staff against it. They'll put lower cost offshoring that may sometimes increase some challenges with quality. So there's a constant tension there as well. Unless you get past that negotiator's dilemma of talking about what really is important and what you're willing to pay, it's often hard for agencies and clients to develop the right kind of value propositions for each other. Innovation comes with this as well, and I think Jeff alluded to this a little bit earlier. We think that all of these new approaches to digital understanding and mobile are the future. We want to innovate with you. What they often mean is they're going to get faster, cheaper, better data than what they're currently doing now. What agencies will hear, especially in the early stages of this innovation, is there's going to be joint investment. There's going to be some front-loaded investment about this to get it to the point where it can be scalable. As a result of that, there's an immediate lack of alignment between agencies and clients about what is necessary early on to drive innovation. Those faster, cheaper, betters, as Jeff alluded to, which I think is absolutely correct, it's a more of an end state. It might take a couple of years to get there. The question is, are we all aligned with what's going to be necessary now to make that happen? So what has to change? We have to obviously develop more trust. And that trust, to a degree, trust is earned. There's no doubt of that. But to a degree, trust is given on faith, and it's earned back by someone being shown to be worthy of that trust. And we have to both work to do that. We have to have much more transparency in terms of how we talk to each other, especially in an innovation space where we've got to know what the business contexts are on either side of the agency and client relationship that are driving the innovation. Co-creation is absolutely essential in this space. We've seen great examples all throughout these last 2.5 days of what clients have been doing to innovate, what agencies have been doing to innovate, but rarely are they doing that in a vacuum. And it's really in that co-creation where it can happen faster and with much more business impact. And communication obviously is critically important. Think about the tone, even the words you use. You hear words like vendor, you hear words like supplier, you hear words like client. Sometimes there's an adjective, positive or negative, before that if you're on the client or on the agency side. But think about, if you're wanting to innovate with someone, do you get innovation from a vendor? Do you get innovation from a supplier? Or do you get them truly from a partner? And a partner that you're working together with and on the agency side is truly behaving as a partner as well. Frequency and method as well. For all the great digital innovation, the single best innovation that we can have is having more conversations, more face-to-face conversations, more telephone conversations, and less trying to do these things by email. Email is probably the single worst medium for driving innovation and driving communication when you're trying to innovate that there possibly is. Because tone gets lost, context gets lost, nonverbals get lost. A few conversations can get you to a solution much, much faster than a back and forth of emails, which often happens. So let's talk about setting budgets, and I think this is a classic approach. You start with last year's plan, if you're on the agent or on the client side rather. You figure out what was kind of a one-off that year that you're probably not going to repeat this year and what's ongoing needs for the business. You add in new learning needs based on your conversations with your external or your internal business partners about what they're trying to achieve that year. Then all of a sudden you get from finance a 70 to 80% size budget to prior year. Anyone experiencing that on the client side? So what do you start doing? You start cutting back, but you're starting from a base of what you've done previously. Very, very difficult to find space for innovation in an environment like that. So as a result, you often find that the innovation is the first thing that hits the cutting room floor, or you start begging, borrowing, and stealing and scraping from across the organization. Very hard for innovation to be a priority for a company that is having to scrape together what it needs to innovate and to invest. And agencies are often as guilty of this as clients. Again, I think Jeff related to the fact that traditional trackers, for example, they're almost a constant money flow for you. So you really don't want to mess with those a lot of times. But agencies will use prior year often to set their budgets and their revenue plans and their revenue targets and their profit projections. And those profits are what they use to plow back into their innovation. So what's a different approach? What if in partnership, again, it's always best practice to start from the business questions. What are the business's objectives in that year, what they're trying to achieve? But stress test everything that you're doing against several criteria. And this has to be done, I believe, in tandem between the agencies and the clients. Does it tell me something I don't know? There's an awful lot of work we do that tells us the same thing we've always known. And I think deep down we all know that. Does it tell me something I can't get anywhere else? As a marketer, there was nothing more frustrating to me than getting the exact same metric from two different studies that told me two different things. And very, very difficult to reconcile. And think about the time and energy client research staff and agency research staff have to do to deconflict those things and try to figure out which one is true. And a lot of times they'll say, well, both are, given their context. Not very helpful to a marketer. Does it drive a decision that the business would not have taken if the research didn't exist? That's what we're in the business of doing. If we aren't enabling a different and a better business decision, it could be really wasted effort. But in addition to that, does the data, the reporting, the analysis, the insight, the recommendation, does it line up with the tempo of the business? My colleague Larry Friedman talked about this yesterday. It's very difficult for a brand manager to action brand tracking when I'm hearing 3 months later what my equity was 3 months ago and what I should be able to do about it. So commit to any existing work that hits these criteria. They're very good. If you hit those, you're really in a good spot with that particular work. Anything that meets a few of them or none of them, those are the hot spots for innovation. Those are the places where we need to figure out how we can innovate to reach these criteria. Can I get a different twist on this so I'm not getting redundant data, but a different perspective that actually might be more holistic? Can I get something faster? Can I get something that is actually going to drive that business decision more effectively? And the last one here is about commissioning work. And here's a cautionary tale. And I refuse to admit whether I was the client or the agency on this one, and you'll see why in a minute. The agency received an initial communication from the client saying that they wanted agency partners who would help them identify deep human insights about their consumers. Very good, audacious goal. So what happened is that the agency started getting together their best thinking in terms of qualitative understanding, in terms of neuroscience, in terms of leading edge understanding of how consumers make decisions and how survey research and qualitative research could help understand that and uncover those key insights. The actual RFP that the agency received was a boilerplate supplier information template, for one. How many countries do you operate in? How many people do you have in your staff? What are your ISO certifications? What are your last tax returns? What was your mother's maiden name? The typical kind of boilerplate stuff you get in an RFI. And a template pricing spreadsheet that had several countries in it, several different parameters around focus groups with incidences and things like that, and they were to populate the pricing for each of those different things that would be summed up. There wasn't an opportunity in this particular instance for the agencies to come back and discuss their philosophy, what they think a deep human insight is, or to ask the client what a deep human insight is as they see it, what techniques to think about, what kind of modeling to do, what kind of deliverables to have, how to really drive that into the organization more effectively. So as a result, you find that you have to ask the question whether your approaches to procuring and commissioning work are aligned with innovation aspirations. And I think a way to think about that from the client side is re-envision what has been a time-tested approach in market research of the RFI, the RFQ, the RFP. Think about it more like a creative brief. And the reason I bring that up is creative briefs are by their nature, by the name, developed to create innovation and creative responses. And creative problem solving is really what our innovation needs to be about. Devote significant time to writing that. Any marketer will tell you that if you write a lousy creative brief, you get lousy advertising. If you write a lousy media brief, you get a lousy media plan. And the best way to get the best work from your agencies is to inspire them. And that takes time to really distill it down and give them something they can really sink their teeth into. And don't just deliver a brief, deliver a briefing. Have conversations. Again, that transaction by email where you get a brief and you've got a couple of weeks to make a response to it, and there's very little chance for interaction, it's very, very difficult to get at what the client is really looking for and for the agencies to get the questions answered that they need. And I'd also recommend allowing agency-specific Q&A, especially in an innovation space, because agencies have some questions that they'll ask that'll give them some indication of whether something that they're working on that might be new and different and might be, for them, a source of competitive advantage. If they don't have the chance to ask those questions where it's not going to be sent out to everybody who's been invited in to pitch, it's very, very difficult. They won't ask the question, they won't get the information, and they won't be able to provide you perhaps their best thinking. And ensure your decision criteria are really aligned with your business objectives, that it's not just about price or some amorphous measure of value, but if innovation is a priority for you and finding new and different ways of doing things, make sure that is a key decision criterion. Otherwise, especially in organizations with professional purchasing groups, it's going to be very, very difficult for organizations on the agency side to separate themselves, and it'll end up being much more commoditized, which is, I think, one of the traps that we as an industry are in. Agencies aren't off the hook here either. Creative agencies are notorious for challenging the brief and saying, I don't actually think that's what you're looking for. And they focus a lot of time and energy on challenging the brief and getting it where it needs to be. We also don't do a very good job, I think, on the agency side of giving clients what we think they need. We are hyper-responsive to what they ask for, but not necessarily with what they need. If we're getting a creative brief, we have to be creative in our response. We have to bring our point of view to life with the clients in a far more engaging way than we currently do. And this is probably the one that takes the most courage. Choose not to respond to a brief you don't believe in. And this is a very difficult environment to do that in. But there's a method to the madness. Clients, especially purchasing clients, have a vested interest in having competition. If one of the players that they are counting on to respond doesn't respond, all of a sudden things get a little out of balance for them. They get a little nervous. So actually saying, I'm not going to respond to the brief often doesn't mean, well, you're out of the running. It leads to a conversation about why did you choose not to respond? And that could actually go back to challenging the brief and coming up with really different and interesting approaches. Maybe the brief gets rewritten, rescoped, and it gives you more leverage, for lack of a better term, to really bring your best thinking to life in your response as an agency. So what's all this mean? I think that in order to achieve faster, more discontinuous innovation, both clients and agencies have to really invest in strong relationships and communication in order to really drive the co-creation that innovation in particular requires. We need to make innovation a priority in our budget setting processes. Every system is perfectly designed for the results it gets. And if we don't make innovation a priority in how we're setting our budgets, both on the agency and the client side, it's not going to happen with nearly the speed that the market is dictating it needs to. And finally, we have to think differently about how we commission work as clients and how we respond to that work as agencies so that we're asking for the best thinking, and it's truly part of our decision-making criteria for a client. And as an agency, that we're bringing that thinking to life in a new and creative way that almost shakes our clients out of their status quo and out of their comfort zones. So if we do that, if we've got innovative methods and technologies, but they're underpinned by those innovative behaviors, I believe that we're going to be in a much better spot to achieve the future faster and together, and to have the impact that all of us crave to have with our business partners in terms of driving their growth. So I think the main thing is, although the innovative behaviors are perhaps the least expensive, because it's really about behavior, in many ways it has proven to be the hardest thing to do. And I'd ask you all to think as you're leaving here, with all this great new technology and all these great new methods and approaches, how are you going to innovate the way that you behave as a client, as an agency, to bring them together faster? Thank you.
We unfortunately don't have any time for, well, actually we have 2 minutes for questions, 2 minutes, 33 seconds. Any questions for Kris?
Just a comment.
Yep.
Sorry for awful briefs, Kris.
Charlie, you're my client. I love you.
Oh no, did you just out him on stage?
No, I didn't. No, I have the pleasure of working with a client that I used to work with, or work for, and it's a lot of what I focus on were not anything I'm receiving, but things I wrote. Being on the agency side has really helped me understand the pains I put my agencies through, and you'll learn a lot from that.
Great. Thank you, Kris.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect.